Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Some of y'all may have seen this talk before. I hope most of you haven't. We've got a few different results, but essentially it's the same kind of thing we'd like to talk about before. Before I get into this, I kind of want to share that this is a proof of concept. We haven't actually applied it in Texas. We're hoping that after our administration sees it enough times, maybe they will start to think about applying it. But generally what we're trying to do is we take angler surveys to understand who our anglers are, and then we take a mechanism where we start to understand not only who these anglers are that answered the survey, but who do they belong to as larger groups. Then we're looking at these larger groups, where these larger groups are concentrated, and then we find out where on the map these larger groups are, and then hopefully we can then address management and or just how we want to either start new fisheries or how we want to manage our current fisheries in order to meet the needs of the anglers, the customers who are in those areas. So that's kind of the general gist of this talk, and I'm going to walk you kind of through how we get there, and our goal obviously is to provide good fisheries for our anglers. So this started in 2010, so it probably is time for us to do another catfish angler survey because it's been a decade since we did one. But we did an angler survey, and we ended up getting about 1,000, just over 1,000 catfish anglers who were willing to participate in our survey. Of those, about 60% answered the second survey, which was our catfish specific survey. And what we found was that we had the ability to discriminate our anglers using both these traditional catch-related attitude metrics that Anderson developed, as well as we would use a stated choice approach to kind of figure out what beyond the catch-related metrics might be intriguing our catfish anglers or drawing our catfish anglers to our various sites. We then we continued to work with Mississippi State, in this case Cliff Hutt, who now works for NOAA. He took the data that we'd gotten from the Catfish Angler Survey and actually were able to find that we had essentially 5 types of catfish anglers in Texas. Our generalists, which were our biggest group, those are people who are going catfish angling, but the catch-related attributes are not the drivers. They're actually sort of as Tom mentioned, we actually have a lot of catfish anglers who are just happy to be out there fishing, and maybe the things that they're most interested in are the amenities at the park, or the fact that they have family places that their families can play while they're fishing. So catching a catfish and harvesting a catfish isn't the highest thing that drives them to be a catfish angler. On down the scale till we have people who are completely focused on numbers, and down to the bottom, our smallest group was our trophy and size group, these are the anglers. If you saw Rob's talk earlier this morning, these are the guys that are going after these 90 and 100 pound catfish. So we have these, and this is generally where our survey takes us, and this is where we typically stop. In fact, I've given talks, and this is where the talk ends, because I'm like, these are what our anglers look like. But from a management perspective, that leaves you a little empty because you don't know where those 32% of the generals live. You don't know where the 8% of the trophy anglers live. And so how do you as a manager use this information to improve your catfish angling satisfaction? So that's the next step. We need to take this and somehow introduce a spatial component to it to either scale up the survey or scale down the survey so our managers know what kind of anglers live in their districts and where do they live within their districts. So we do this using a method called Tapestry, or a metric called Tapestry. Now Tapestry is developed by Esri, and what it does is it takes everybody in the US and it divides you into one of 67 types of clusters that they've defined, and these clusters are based on your ethnicity, it's based on your how much money you make, it's based on what kind of things you like to do as hobbies, it's based on what you watch on TV. Bottom line is, they've got you pretty well defined into one of these 67 groups. And so just as you may know, because you live in a neighborhood, you realize that most people in your neighborhood look a lot like you, and they probably do a lot of the same things you do. So just as an example, I looked at Kerrville. What are the top tapestries in Kerrville, which is where I live, and it said top tapestries were midlife constants and silver and gold. Well, midlife constants are people who are nearing retirement, a little bit above average income, and they're type of living is a little more urban than a little more rural than urban. And if you think about Kerrville, and you know Kerrville, which I do, that describes people like me and my friends pretty well. The other big group is our silver and gold, and those are white, upper class retirees. Well, that is Kerrville for the most part. We've got a large group of upper upper class retirees, so that you can tell it's self-affirming that yes, I'm exactly seeing what I think I should with these Tapestry demographics. If I looked at Little Rock, just to give you another example, in this zip code right here, we have two major demographics. It's our Social Security set, which are an older group that lives in downtown areas, and our Young and Restless, which are our college-educated techies who move around a lot. But then right across the river, you've got three different tapestries. So these tapestries are as fine-scaled as a census block. And you can think about neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are typically a little bit larger than census blocks, but they're not zip code level, which is why, as you see later on, if you move in, we're not going to actually go at the zip code level. We're going to drill down a little bit finer than that. So I've now gone from something that I've got 5 clusters of anglers to now I've got 67 clusters of people and 5 clusters of anglers, and you're like, hang on, he's made the problem more difficult, not easier. How are we going to bring those two groups together? Well, we do that using this multivariate statistical technique that we're going to use PCA, principal components analysis, and we're also going to use SimProf, which is a way of defining which clusters are significantly different from one another. And we do this in a tool that we use called Primer, although you can do it in R or anything else that has some of these multidimensional techniques. The reason we like Primer is Primer uses permutation-based testing, and it does a lot of non-parametric testing. And so you're not having to really focus on the idea that it has to be a normal distribution. You don't have to have multivariate normal distributions in your tests. And so for us, it adds a robustness that we like a lot. And that's why we go there. So for those of you who aren't familiar with how you might want to use this multivariate approach, I've got a little data matrix here. You can see that on the left side, I've got my tapestries. I've only put 3 instead of the 67. Across the top, I've got my clusters. And what happens is those are my 5 clusters in this case instead of my 3. But you can see that when I pull my numbers together, I've got 40% of cluster 1 was in tapestry 1, 40% of cluster 2 was in tapestry 2, and I've got this matrix that I developed, weighting all my different tapestries by all my different clusters. And then I do the similarity. There's a bunch of different methods that we can use to get a similarity matrix. But like I said, we're going to use PCA, which uses Euclidean difference. And then obviously if a distance of 0 becomes a similarity of 100. And you can see that down the diagonals you have similarities of 100, which means a cluster is identical to itself as far as its tapestry makeup. But then you can also see that the various clusters have different scores, and the closer the clusters are in their tapestries, the higher the scores in similarity. So that's how you start to consolidate this 67 degrees of on one element and 5 on the other. And this is all based on this primer stuff was based for using on species. So we're used to having species and sites, and then having some other underlying structure to those. So what do we got? So this is a PCA response from the data that we put in, and what we found was our size-based cluster actually are significantly different in their tapestries than are the other 4 clusters. We've also put our Texas adult population in there just to give you a sense of how different they are from our Texas population, and we see that essentially what we're doing is we're splitting this into 2 axes. Along the first axis, we have a rooted rural versus up-and-coming families tapestry split. And then north to south on our second axis, Southwest families are the big change. We don't have a lot of Southwest families in most of our catfish angling, except the size group is closer to our Southwest families than any of the others are. And Southwest families are our Hispanics. And they're one of our largest growing groups in Texas. So I'm going to talk about them a little later. So even though it's not significantly Southwest families doesn't significantly pull something out, the rooted rural and the up-and-coming families do. So how do we use that? Okay, we're getting closer, right? We're getting closer to something we want to be able to be used because we still don't know where they are. So this is another way of looking at the PCA. It's called a shade plot. And what you're looking at is you can see that across the top, I've got my SimProf stuff, which shows that my size cluster is significantly different from my other clusters. You can also see which clusters are closer to one another based on that. And the darker the color on the shade plot, that means there's a lot more of that there compared to the light. Light means it's either missing or there's fewer. And I'm going to highlight just real quickly, this is the up-and-coming families versus the rooted rurals. How do they differ? Well, they differ quite a lot, actually. Our rooted rurals are older people, non-Hispanic whites. They lean far right politically. They live in Appalachia and East Texas, and they enjoy the outdoors. That's what that cluster identifies as. In contrast, our up-and-coming are more young and mobile. They're found in our metro areas, and they're more family-focused. So we're getting closer now. We're starting to lock in this geography now because of which of these tapestries they are. So now we can go to the final step, which is mapping. Oh, so this is a map of where our trophy size tapestries are versus where our other catfish angler tapestries are. And the reason this has become important because within the other element of our stated choice questionnaire in the survey, we found that, like a lot of people have, most of our anglers want to fish close to home. So it doesn't do no good to create a fishery that's 150 miles away when most people want to fish within 30 minutes of where they live. So I've got the green circles, that's Dallas-Fort Worth, just for those of you who aren't familiar with Texas. This yellow is kind of the Houston metro area with the Galveston Bay down there. And what you can see is if you look at these two graphs is we have very different ideas of where these people are. Our trophy size people, yes, there's some in the Dallas area, and yeah, there's some near Houston, but for the most part, they're in our East Texas. They're near Lake Tawakoni. They're near Lake Rayburn. They're near Lake Livingston. That's where those people live. So if you manage one of those lakes, managing for trophies is probably a good deal because that's where these people are located. In contrast, for our other anglers, generalists and all that, you're starting to see that they're actually more focused in our urban areas. So an urban fishery, trying to create a trophy catfish fishery in an urban area is probably not the best idea. Focusing more on that harvest-oriented aspect is probably better, as well as, remember, our generalists are also found in our urban areas, and those people are not really focused on that catch-related attitudes at all. So focusing on the amenities that we provide for them, these parks that have places for their families to go, parks that have lighting so they feel safe, parks so that there's bathrooms there so that they can go to the bathroom when they're in this park. Some of these people even like the more natural sense of it. So setting it up so that they can have a sense of nature while they're at the park, while they're fishing. So those are the kinds of things that we have. Now, one of the other things that this tapestry allows us to do is we can actually use this idea and project where future populations are going to be. So these are our current populations. These are where they're located. But you can't develop a fishery overnight. It takes time. So one of the things we did is we projected for the next 5 years, where will these people be from the Southwest families? Remember, Southwest families is a developing group of people. They're not really the focus of our current catfish anglers, but within Texas, they're a growing demographic, and we want to attract them. And if you look at some of the surveys, they are attractable. They are willing to fish. We just need to make sure we provide those opportunities close to where they are. And what we find is, for our Southwest families, proportional growth, we're finding that we're going to have growth in that Dallas-Fort Worth area of this demographic. We're going to have growth in this Houston area of this demographic. And we're going to have growth along the southern border and including Corpus Christi of this demographic, as well as that's Austin and San Antonio. So where should we be focusing our catfish efforts for these groups, our Southwest families, if we do want to attract these anglers? We want to focus them on these areas. And obviously, like I said, the size and trophy aspect of them, they are some more interested in that than some. So you might have some trophy aspect somewhere near these areas. But I think what this really shows us is we need to understand these people even better than we do. Our statewide survey doesn't hit this southern area very hard at all. And so we probably need to focus in on maybe a Southwestern family specific survey to really understand what's driving their needs, what's driving their desires, what kind of fisheries do they expect us to provide for them in order for us to be successful. So, overview of my talk is we can use the surveys to better understand our anglers, but again, the surveys don't let us get to that fine scale management that we need as either an agency or a manager. We can use the survey results with an understanding, with our tapestry in order to create these understanding of who these people are, and then along this geographic gradient, and then figure out where they live, and then obviously not only where they live, but where we should be directing our management activities. And that's the end of the talk. These are my co-authors, but I accept all responsibilities for anything that gets said up here. Any questions?
Got time for a few questions? We have
Yes, sir.
In your survey, were you able to tease apart, say, boat-based anglers and shore-based anglers?
The short answer is I can't answer that question well, so I hate to mislead you. I do know that for our surveys, most of our anglers are boat-based that answer the surveys. And so, Stan, do you remember, like in our statewide, I think it's in the 80% range of the people that actually answer the survey are our boat-based anglers. And so we don't really have a lot of resolution on, we don't have that many people answering the survey on the shore-based side. So we didn't tease that out, so I don't really have an answer, but I guess the big answer is, even if I started to tease that out, I'm not sure it would be something that I'd feel very comfortable with because of the split that we see in who's answering the surveys. Yeah, Ben?
Something that stuck out to me when you were showing the maps of the Ruby Rurals, Butchawakanee, and the up-and-comers in DFW, I'm getting a chicken or an egg question. If these folks are preferring these trophy opportunities because they live at Tawakanee, and I'm curious if there's a way to account for that.
Not within this survey. I think that's what I'm a risk taker. I'm a researcher, right? I think that's one of the things I would like to do is sort of do some of this on the front end and make some of these changes and see, are we getting people in these areas to change their behaviors, and we've created a trophy fishery and now they've become trophy fishermen, or is it? So I really don't know the answer if it's chicken or egg. I too was struck by that. I think likely some of those big water bodies, well, if you look at who these people are and what they're fishing for, I think that for the most part, I think that I would say they're probably really interested in going fishing in these large water bodies for these trophy fish. I think what you'd see if it was more the fact that they wanted, like if you created the fishery and they wanted to fish for it, I think you'd also see these other tapestries in that area as well. And the fact that you don't, I think, suggests to me that really what they're seeing is, if I live in this area and I have this fishery, I'm going to really want to take advantage of this fishery. But I'm not really going to, many of them aren't going to travel to go to that fishery if that's not what they really want to do. They really are going to do what they want to do close to home. So that's, I think it is chicken and egg, but I also think that what we're doing is we're missing some of the people that would be interested in catfish fishing if we only focus a management activity on the one that looks like it's the most popular there. So, hope that answers the question a little bit.
So great talk and very interesting. I was thinking, so did you do any non-response check in terms of seeing tapestries and people that didn't respond to see maybe those tapestries that you're missing out on their catch-related attitude information?
That's a really good point, and it is. We intend to do more work in this area on the larger statewide survey. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. That's kind of why we brought the Texas adults in, to kind of show you that our Texas adults don't look like any of our catfish anglers. So we are, I guess we're missing them. To go to the second part, the non-response of our tapestries, we haven't done that. It's a really good point. We probably could and should do that. So I'll think about that and do it on the future. Yes, sir.
I had two questions. One, the primer, when you predict, is it when you predict it into the future where the Southwest families are going to?
That's tapestry.
Oh, Tapestry, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Was that in the program that allowed you to predict out?
It is. They've got, within the program, they actually give you that 5-year projection, and it's only a 5-year projection. You can also, one of the things that we've discussed doing is we actually have, you can work with your demographers as well. We've got the results coming out of primer directly are comparable to what our demographers were saying as well. And so you could take those tapestries and work with your demographers to kind of get a sense of what things are going to look like as well. It's just, the linkage is not one-to-one, and when you're doing a paper, you want a linkage one-to-one. What was your other question?
Yeah, just kind of following off of hers, did you find areas where the Texas adults were similar to your fishermen groups that you actually didn't get a lot of responses from, or could you go back and see why are we missing these individuals that are similar to our fishermen, but for some reason either they're not fishing or they weren't in the survey for some reason?
I think the short answer is I haven't done it yet. The longer answer is we've been doing some work on our statewide survey, and what we're finding truthfully is that even if you try to do a non-response bias correction, we know for a fact that the people who are answering our surveys are self-selecting in ways that don't represent the random angler who's fishing for us. But how you correct for it when, for instance, we know they're white, we know they're males, we know that most of them are buying a license more often, more frequently. There are more avid anglers, and there are more regular anglers. So that's the kind of survey bias that's coming in. How you correct for the people that aren't responding is the difficult part, because we're getting so few of those people responding to the survey itself. And so, at least using the methodology we're using, I don't feel comfortable that we can correct for it. I think we have to come up with a different approach to really get at the question that y'all are asking, which is, what about these people who aren't responding to your surveys? What do they want and what do they look like? I don't think we can correct by using the data we have. I think we have to go to another data source or find another way of contacting these people. I think that's the only way I can think of it. But if you have other ways of us to do it, come to me afterwards, and I'd love to listen to you.
All right, thanks, Warren, I appreciate it.
Thank you.